This is the UNAS Pro, a rack-mount NAS device from Ubiquiti that blends functionality, ease of use, and accessibility into what I consider to be quite possibly the most user-friendly NAS device that you can purchase. And it's $499. More on that later. The UNAS Pro has 7 bays that fit 3.5 or 2.5 inch drives, a quad-core ARM processor, 8 gigabytes of memory, a 1 gigabit Ethernet port, and a 10 gigabit SFP Plus port. It also has a redundant power supply that you can use if you own the power backup, which is a great feature because redundant power supplies are needed in a lot of small business and enterprise environments, so it's a great optional feature. It can be configured with the UniFi mobile application paired with Bluetooth, and that's where the ease of use starts because once it's paired, everything is managed with the UniFi Site Manager the same way all other UniFi devices are managed. This gives you a single pane of glass to manage everything from your router and firewall to your switches and access points, your surveillance setup, accessories, and now your NAS. We will look through just about every setting on the UNAS Pro, starting with the setup process, and I'll give you my opinion on everything later in the video. Now, the easiest way to set the device up is with the UniFi mobile application. Plug the device in, add the drives, launch the application, and it will pop right up. You will walk through the setup process, and the only real decision you have to make is on the type of storage protection you'd like to use. You have 2 options, basic protection, which is RAID 5, and higher protection, which is RAID 10. Higher protection will be faster, mainly due to the performance benefits RAID 10 has over RAID 5. RAID 10 is RAID 1+0, so it's a striped mirrored pair. You'll lose half the available storage, but will have the fastest overall option. RAID 5, which is basic protection, is slower than RAID 10 due to parity calculations, but it allows for an individual drive to fail without losing any data. We'll take a look at the performance later in this video, but the only other option you have is a hot spare. A hot spare is used in the event that a drive fails. It basically just sits there on standby, and the second that a drive fails, fills in for that drive and becomes part of the RAID array. With higher protection, this is a great overall option, mainly because the maximum array size can only be 6 drives. Since they're striped mirrored pairs, you need an even number of drives with RAID 10, so the 7th drive can act as a hot spare for greater protection. With basic protection, it's a little different because you can technically use all 7 drives if you'd like. This means that if your goal is to have the most available storage space, you should go with basic protection because you'll be able to utilize 6 full drives of storage and the 7th will be used for redundancy. You can also use 6 drives and the 7th as a hot spare, but that's up to you. The main point here is that you should determine what you want to use in advance, because if you want to change protections, you'll have to move data off the NAS, recreate the RAID array, and then move it back. After the setup process is complete, you can launch the dashboard of the UNAS Pro. The dashboard displays all of the information you'll need at a high level and is a quick way to ensure that your drives are functioning properly, backups are running successfully, and you're not running out of storage space. It also displays other information related to file services, sign-ins, as well as throughput, and it's just a clean overall dashboard. The bulk of time, however, will be spent in the drives section. This is where you'll create new drives, manage permissions, enable snapshots, create sharing links, search through your data, and more. To create a new drive, select the Add Shared Drive link. Give the shared drive a name, determine if you'd like to limit storage space, add your permissions, and you're done. When the shared drive is created, you can select it to display the information related to it on the right-hand side. If you select the Protections button, this is where you can enable a snapshot schedule. And after you modify the settings based on the protection you'd like, you're done. Snapshots freeze data at a point in time and allow you to cycle back through the snapshot versions to restore data to that specific point in time if you ever need to. Snapshots run based on the schedule that's configured, and you can have a different snapshot schedule based on the shared drive. As soon as a snapshot schedule or a backup schedule, which we'll go over later, is added for a specific drive, you'll see directly in the drive section that it's been enabled. I had to go back and think about this, but I don't think I've ever used a pre-built NAS operating system that displays the most important configuration, meaning snapshots and backups, the way the UNAS Pro does. And now that I've seen it, I can't really figure out why. This is great for beginners, but it's great for everyone else too, because you should have snapshots and backups configured on almost every single shared drive you have. And displaying it like this ensures that it doesn't get missed. So +1 to the UI and UX developers at Ubiquiti. Clicking into a drive will display the data inside of that drive. This is also where you can share data with external users. If you right-click a file or folder inside of a shared drive, you can create a shared link to it with link expiration, an access limit, and a password. This is a feature that just works. With other pre-built NAS operating systems, you normally have to do some sort of configuration before you're able to share files with external users. This just works, meaning no configuration, no port forwarding, and you'll be able to share data with external people. I've shared small and large files in my testing, and everything has functioned as expected. Finally, if snapshots are configured on a drive, this is where you'll navigate through those snapshots. In the top right, you'll see a current version drop-down menu, which allows you to cycle through prior snapshots. You can then download or restore a specific file or folder directly from the drive section. This is another place where the UI and UX really shines, because on other pre-built NAS operating systems, you might have to mount the actual snapshot folder, and it's a little confusing at first. With the UNAS Pro, click the drop-down menu and you can cycle through your snapshots. If you'd like to restore the entire drive to a specific snapshot, you'll select Restore on the right-hand side without actually selecting any files or folders. Again, probably the easiest way to navigate through snapshots on any pre-built NAS operating system that I've used. That's basically it for the drive section. There's a lot there, but it doesn't seem it because from a UI and UX perspective, it's laid out very, very well, especially in comparison to competitor NAS operating systems. The drive section really has all the information you need from a day-to-day usage perspective after the NAS has been configured, which is done in the settings. This is where you'll configure backups, manage your snapshots and shared links, enable file services, and more. We'll start off in the most important section, which is the services section, as this is how you'll actually access data on the NAS from client devices. There are two main options. You can enable SMB and Time Machine with a single checkbox. Once SMB is enabled, you can access a drive on Windows or Mac OS by using the correct SMB address. The key here is that in the admin and users section, local credentials must be configured for each user, as these are the credentials they'll use to access the NAS locally. One other thing to mention with Time Machine is that if you intend on using this feature, I'd suggest creating a new user for Time Machine specifically with a quota set on the personal drive, which I'll explain later. Time Machine backups are sent to the user's personal drive, and you don't want the Time Machine backup eating all the space on your NAS, so creating a new user and setting a quota for that user's personal drive is the best approach for that. The only other option in the services section to look at is drive encryption. By enabling it, adding an encryption password, and selecting the drives you'd like encrypted, they will not be accessible until the encryption password or key is used to decrypt the drive. You'll have to decrypt the drive every time the NAS reboots, and if you lose that password or encryption key, you will not be able to access that data. So understand the potential implications before encrypting any drives. The next most important section will be backups. After creating a task, there are three main ways to run backups. You can configure them to a remote UNAS device, an SMB folder, or Google Drive. The backups are fairly basic, but they just kind of work. Select the data you'd like to back up, where you'd like to back it up, and then how you'd like the data to be retained. The backup itself is a file level backup, meaning that a folder is created on the destination with subfolders for all your drives, and then the subfolders inside of there with all of your data. If you select Retain All Data, data on the source NAS will not be removed from the destination NAS. If you replace all data, you'll in essence have a mirror of the source NAS on the destination NAS. Overall, it's a basic backup tool, but it does exactly what you need, and since it's a file level backup, you don't have to worry about any special tools or applications to access the backup, you just have the files. Now remember, backups are generally a second line of defense, so snapshots should be configured on a NAS as well. You won't really need to navigate to this section too often, mainly because of how convenient the snapshot settings are inside of the drives themselves. This section allows you to view all the settings at a glance, modify them, and even delete all snapshots if you ever need to. I found myself navigating here very infrequently, but either way, having it in a section like this is important and ensures snapshots are set up and configured properly. Finally, push notifications and shared links. Push notifications are very important because NAS devices are generally configured, then accessed through SMB. So you can go long stretches without logging into the drive console. These notifications are fairly granular and allow you to ensure that if the NAS ever runs into an issue with storage, backups, snapshots, and more, you'll actually know it because notifications are enabled. The only other section here is shared links, which is just a view of all of your links as well as when they will or have expired. The only other section to look through is the control plane, as it's very similar on the UNAS Pro as it is on other UniFi applications. This is where you can check for updates, configure backups, and modify some of the console settings. This is also where you'll actually shut the NAS down or reboot it if you ever need to. The storage section is where you'll see storage protection you're using, as well as all the disk information. You really won't navigate here very often, as a lot of this information is on the dashboard, but it's in the control plane if you ever need it. Now, managing users is arguably one of the most important things you could do for any NAS device, and it's managed in the admin and user section. This is where you can add new users, modify permissions, and create new admins. Every single user that you create on your NAS will have a personal drive. The personal drive is where the user will store documents that are unique to them. But this is also where users' time machine backups are stored. Finally, there's one more section that I personally never used until the UNAS Pro, and it's awesome. In the Identity Endpoint tab, you can enable file access, and it even has directory integration for single sign-on in enterprise environments. If you then head back to a user, you can add their email address and send them an invitation, and they can download the UniFi Identity mobile application. From there, they can sign into their account and have drive access directly in the app. This allows the user to access their data remotely without having to connect to a VPN or anything like that, but more importantly, allows you as an administrator to manage mobile remote access. Now, there's more you can do with Identity Endpoint, including one-click VPNs and more, but from a drive perspective, that user is now tied to that account and will have all of their data available on the mobile application. Next up is power consumption, and I'd say it's good. It's not amazing by any means, but it was idling around 47 watts, and during read and write operations, it peaked around 74 watts. For a device where I currently have 7 hard drives in it, I'd say that's pretty good. It's not incredible, but it's certainly not bad either. Now onto the performance. Overall, the performance I saw out of the device was very good. Navigating the user interface is smooth with no real signs of slowdown. From a throughput perspective, it can't saturate a full 10 gigabit connection, but I was averaging between 650 and 750 megabytes per second of transfer speeds, which overall is very strong for a device at this price point. Now back to that price point. For $499, this is such an amazing value. I really don't know how else to say it. Because if you asked me what I thought the device would cost, it would have easily been $200 to $300 more. So I was pleasantly surprised, to say the least, from a price perspective. In a rack mount design, I don't think you'll find something comparable. So again, another win for the UNAS Pro. So that's basically it for the UNAS Pro from a hardware, software, power consumption, performance, and pricing perspective. Now that we went over everything, I want to give you my thoughts. I've used a lot of NAS operating systems, from pre-built NAS operating systems like Synology and TerraMaster to DIY options like TrueNAS, Unraid, and Open Media Vault. I mean this sincerely when I say it. None of them are as easy to use as the UniFi console on the UNAS Pro. From the setup to day-to-day usage, none of them are as straightforward to use. Now, I know your next thought will be that none of them are as simple because this device has a lot less functionality than the others, so it's not a fair comparison. Kind of, but not really. You can go back through videos I've done on other NAS devices, and the one thing I've said in almost every single review is that none of them focus on building a functional and reliable NAS. They all focus on ancillary stuff like applications and Docker, which are completely useless if the actual NAS doesn't function properly. So when I see this, I don't view it as limited functionality. I view it as reliable functionality that has been prioritized. My expectation is that this operating system will continue to grow the same way the UniFi Network application or the UniFi Protect applications have. But to say at this point in time that it's lacking functionality isn't viewing the whole picture. What you're getting today is functionality that actually works. When you store data on the NAS, you don't really have to worry about it the way you do on other new pre-built NAS operating systems. That means that you're starting off with a reliable NAS that will slowly increase in functionality over time, rather than a NAS with a ton of functionality that will be unreliable, and that in itself is a huge win. This approach makes me fairly comfortable saying to you that you can purchase this device and when it's released with the official software, have a reliable NAS, which if you go back to any review I've done on almost every other new NAS device isn't something I'm willing to do. That doesn't mean it's impossible for problems to pop up. but it does imply that the limited scope has a smaller chance of bugs occurring. And assuming there are bugs, the smaller scope leads to a smaller code base, which means that it will most likely be fixed rather quickly. It's also fairly comforting that you're dealing with a huge company that has a proven track record of supporting and enhancing their software, which can only be viewed as a positive. Now, that's not to say there aren't areas where I'd love to see improvements, but it's more to say that I'm okay with where we are today. I'd love to see a RAID 6 option because I think it's a good fit for a 7-bay NAS device and will give you the best overall protection from a redundancy perspective. I'd love to see more cloud storage options as backup destinations, with some sort of file level encryption, because I think that's very important for a NAS device. I'd love for this device to be able to monitor a UPS and shut down automatically, which I don't believe it can currently do. I think that more file services in the future other than SMB would be great. Now, from an application standpoint, the truth is I don't think that this device needs applications like Docker or file sync tools if it can be a full-featured, reliable NAS device. That doesn't mean I'd be upset if they added anything. It's just that I'd rather them focus on NAS functionality for the foreseeable future and slowly add to the current offering. That will give us all more of the features that we use on a regular basis while keeping some of the lesser important features for the future or even offloaded to a more purpose-built device. So in summary, overall, I'm very happy with the approach they took because I've reviewed a lot of first-generation NAS devices, and the UNAS Pro is the best device out of all of them. It isn't going to have the most features out of the gate, but I don't think it needs them. It needs the features that it currently has for consumers to jump on board and will hopefully be improved over time the same way that other Ubiquiti software has. So yeah, I like it, and I think you will too. I have an affiliate link in the description if you're interested in supporting the channel, and if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Other than that, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.